Welcome to Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC podcast, the show where we explore the cool, the hot, and the everything in between of the HVACR industry. Each week, we dig into the innovations, the insights, and the inspiring stories that power our trade, from the classroom to the job site and beyond. This episode is brought to you by this week's amazing sponsors: Daikin Comfort Technology, perfecting the air since 1924. Lincoln Tech, put your potential to work. NAVAC, professional tools and equipment for HVACR technicians. Amitral Trainers, globally impactful, personally empowering. As well as A-Gas, together we can. Whether you're just getting started or you've been turning wrenches for decades like myself, there's always something new for us to learn. I'm Clifton Beck, and this is Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC podcast. Let's dive in. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC podcast. We are spending some time today talking about invasive diagnostics with our good friend, Joey Henderson, otherwise known as JoJo, the HVAC man. How are you?
I'm doing great, Clifton. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful, hanging out in the new studio and getting everything fine-tuned. We actually took it out on the road to Hudson Technologies. I was over there Monday and Tuesday shooting a behind-the-scenes video of the life cycle of a recovery cylinder, right? So just, talking about the journey, like from the time it leaves the manufacturer, leaves Hudson, goes out to the field. We shot field of a contractor recovering. I mean, it was an amazing, when it comes back to the facility and we split and send the refrigerant one direction, send the cylinder the other direction. And it was really cool because while I was there, they were telling us that they work with about 40 different refrigerants there at that facility.
Wow.
It brings up one of the topics that's near and dear to both of us. When we're talking about refrigerants, a lot of people go, oh, these new A2Ls or these new A3s, what's the pressure run on those things? And as technicians who have been out in the field for a while, we've both really got a passion for knowing what the temperature is. And the refrigerant is almost irrelevant until you're ready to convert it to pressure, because our systems run on temperature. And a lot of people don't understand that.
That's right. Yeah, it's funny because, when I got in it, joined the Navy in '88. And so when I got in it, it was R12 and R22 was still out there with a couple other 500 refrigerants. But, when I stepped out of the Navy, I stepped right into the world of change, 1991. And so we were converting, from 22 to 410A, from R12 to 134A, and everybody was going berserk. And then whenever I became 410A certified in 1995.
Wow.
And then in 98 or 99, somewhere around there, I sold my company and got hired on to Carrier as a tech rep. Well, I was doing all the training for 410A across the country, across the state. And everybody was just freaking out on what the pressures are going to be, And then I talked to an old timer before my time, and he goes, yeah, we were all freaking out when we went from R12 to R22 because the pressures were so much higher. He said, we had R12 in air conditioners. And I remember I actually came across a couple of ACs that had R12 in them. They were residential, right? And so these systems are designed for whatever pressure they hold, but there's no magic pressure. Pressures are related to temperature. And the more and more I dug into that and the more I started embracing that, it made my life a lot easier because, boy, in the refrigeration market, it was nuts. You think going from R22 to 410A, oh my gosh, refrigeration market, they had so many different choices of, refrigerants. So I've got to where I finally understood and zeroed in on it's not about the pressures, it's about the saturation temperatures. And so it doesn't really matter what flavor of ice cream is in that system. If we know what saturation temperatures we're looking for, then we're fine because they're going to change again. I'm sure they will.
Yeah. But there's going to be more refrigerants.
Absolutely. The application determines the saturation temperature, which determines the pressure.
There you go.
So, walk-in coolers, have a colder evaporator than walk-in freezers. And air conditioners have a warmer evaporator, obviously, than coolers and freezers. But what should the temperature be? And if we know that, it doesn't matter what refrigerant we got. We just convert the saturation temperature to the saturation or to the pressure of whatever refrigerant, and you're golden. So no need to worry about, like back in the day, R22, everybody said 70 on the suction and 225 on the head, and we're good, right? That's all they did, you know. But what they didn't know is that actually related to design conditions.
Very specific condition.
Very specific conditions. And if you now know what the conditions you're in, you'll know what those should be. So yeah. So I love to talk about it because I think it alleviates a lot of no pun intended, a lot of pressure.
You're right.
You know,
absolutely.
A lot of pressure. And so you don't have to worry, you know, what pressure do I need to be? Don't worry about that at all. I'll tell you today, and like you and I already know, what saturation temperatures are when it's running right, clean. And then you could even be able to get an idea of what the subcool superheat is without throwing any gauges whatsoever on the equipment.
I love it. Let's break it down and let's go through some examples to kind of show people, because it kind of really is based on the performance design. You know, if it was a earlier 10 SEER or when we went to 13 SEER and then 14 SEER 2. So it really, there is a difference in the system designs. But once you understand what that is, any piece of equipment in that generation is going to be operating very, very similarly on temperature if we have proper airflow indoor as well as outdoor. It all starts with proper airflow. So let's assume, I hate assuming because you know what it's going to do to you and me. Let's assume we've cleaned the blower wheel. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, it's mainly technicians listening. They know where this was going. So let's assume we've cleaned the blower wheel. If it was a gas furnace, we've cleaned the secondary heat exchanger, we've cleaned the evaporator, we've got our airflow set to the proper CFM for the size that we have. We verified we don't have excessive duct pressure, which would reduce our airflow. We've cleaned the outdoor coil. We've made sure that the system is ready to run properly, right? As designed. We fire this up. We've got proper airflow. It's not good. No such thing as good. Good's a determination made by false expectations.
The handometer goes if it's good airflow.
That's right. So we have proper airflow indoors. We have proper airflow outdoors. We can now actually analyze how this system is running based on temperature alone without putting a set of gauges on this thing.
That's right. That's right. There's quite a bit that we can do, which it really blows my mind. So going back to what you said, you know, a lot of guys miss that. And so, you know, be sure you got the right airflow. Now, if you got a constant CFM system, you know, a true variable speed motor, you're probably going to be pretty good there. But don't forget, it does have a limit. And also, if you got a constant torque, we're pretty darn good there too as well. Just remember that if you're pushing that constant torque, you will blow the capacitors eventually. Unlike a variable speed motor has a limiter on it, constant torque, they just keep drawing from the capacitor until they blow. That's why a lot of them blow these days, by the way. And then a PSC motor, you know, just remember one of the things you can do is pull an amp draw on a PSC motor. If it's pulling less than its rated amps, it's moving less air. Amperage are a direct relationship to how much air it's moving. So if you got a PSC motor and it's pulling full load amps, that means it's fully loaded, which is a good thing. All right. Now, don't forget one last thing. Not only clean evaporator coils, not only clean condenser, but clean blower wheel. That means both sides, everybody, both sides.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've had to pull many a blower wheel housings out, tear them apart, clean them, put them all back together to get good airflow. Don't forget that part. And don't forget those double row condensers. Split them open and clean in between them. That will get you every time. All right, so I do my little spill there.
I love it.
Properly cleaned. All right, so now we got all the proper, right? All right, so now what a big thing that changing the efficiency, a lot of people think about the meter device, which is true, but if all of us old timers out there that worked on 10 SEER and then changed them out even to 12 SEER. We rolled out a unit that could be 3 feet tall and 3 feet wide, and we rolled in one that was 4 feet tall. Okay, you could literally slide the old condenser inside the new condenser. And what it was is we had these big coils, bigger surface area on the outdoors. And so a lot of the efficiency changed with the outdoor coil as it got bigger and needed more surface area. Not only that, but they were also reducing the compression ratio. So they were reducing how high pressure to get the right saturation temperature the compressor needed to go from low suction to high suction. And the less the lower we could change that, then the more efficient the system was.
Yep,
all right.
less amp draw. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the old units, the way they designed them, and we're going to look at design conditions, 95-degree outside with 75-degree inside. Okay. We're not going to be looking at humidity. We're not going to look at wet bulb because we're just looking at return air dry bulb temperature.
Dry bulb temps.
Which everybody loves looking at dry bulb. But we're going to talk about wet bulb if we got time.
Right.
All right. So that's another invasive check, right? So one thing you need to know is that, and there's by the way, Brian Orr on his website has got a very good chart that has all this listed on what the air over condenser temperature ought to be. Oh, I know it's also built into some apps out there as well. But the older units, the 8 SEER and the 10 SEER units, they were designed so that they had to bring the saturation temperature of the refrigerant in the condenser 30 degrees hotter than the outdoor air coming into it. That way it would reject the heat out of the refrigerant. Because remember, heat goes from hot to cold. So we had to get that heat to move out of the refrigerant into the air. Well, think about it. You know, we're trying to cool something off at 95 degrees. I don't know about you, but if I take a 95-degree shower, I'm not going to be so cool. All right. So, but if I was 130 degrees, then that would feel really cool to me. Right. So they designed them so that it's saturation temperature. We're not worried about the pressure. We want to know what should the saturation temperature be. Well, if it's a 10 SEER unit, 8 to 10, on average, they designed them that they had to jack that saturation temperature up to 30 degrees above ambient.
Okay.
So, and it didn't matter the refrigerant. We're not talking about whatever refrigerant's in the system. So if you took a 10 SEER unit, and if it was 95 degrees outside, I would add 30. That would give me 125-degree target saturation.
Okay. I like it.
And then
following
there, you would just look at your PT chart. You know, the old days we had them in our pockets.
Oh, yeah. All right. Unfolded.
And then one day somebody pointed out that was on my gauges as well.
Yeah.
You know, all the numbers I just ignored. I took with that one big fat number, but
yeah. What's these inside?
That's actually saturation temperature related to the pressure. All right. So, you know, you could get on your gauge, look for the green circle, right, for R22, and that pressure would be related to that saturation temperature. And so now you know that, and of course, most of your 8 or 10 SEERs are going to be R22, right?
Right.
So you would take, even if it was a lower temperature, it doesn't matter. You just add 30 to whatever the air temperature is coming into that condenser. And be sure that you measure the air temperature coming in. Careful you don't, and I made these mistakes. I would lay my thermometer or clip it to the grill.
Right.
Well, that grill and the coil can actually radiate heat.
Right out that metal.
Never thought about that. So I started holding it away from the condenser.
Sure.
You know, if you don't want to sit there and hold it, you know, prop it up on your refrigerator bottle or something, you know, just, you know, keep it so that it's reading air temperature. And don't go to the your phone, because that's the weather station's temperature. You know, if that unit's on the roof, we want to know what it is on the roof. Add 30, and that's where you are. So it doesn't matter. So any of these older units, add 30 to the ambient. That's what your saturation temperature ought to be. And then it's as simple as converting that to the pressure of whatever refrigerant is in that unit. Okay.
Okay.
So now let's look at the more efficient units. Well, the more efficient they got, the least amount of air over ambient they need to make that saturation.
Okay.
So because they're more efficient, right? So now we're reducing the load on the compressor, which means they can put smaller compressors in these units now. So, and that's why the units got cheaper. So
part of it, yeah.
So they would be able to get in there with a smaller compressor, bigger coil, and get the efficiency down. So now what we do is we're going to take like a 14 SEER unit on average, and even 14 SEER 2 would run around 20 degrees above ambient. 20 degrees above ambient.
Okay.
And if you took the ambient air and added 20, that's what your new saturation temperature ought to be. And in this case, if it was 95, it'd be 95 plus 20. So now your saturation temperature should be 115, unlike the old one, which was 125. And now you take that 115, you convert to head pressure. Well, our new 14 SEER 2s have got R54B in them or R32. And everybody wants to know, well, now what should my new pressures be? You don't have to worry about that. The question is, what should my saturation temperature be? The same as it's always been.
Exactly.
You're going to add 20 to 95, and that's on average where you ought to be. And so 410A was that way, 454B is that way, R32 is going to be that way, and whatever other flavor of ice cream they stick in that system down the road.
Nope. Who knows what it is?
It's an application issue, not a refrigerant issue.
Exactly.
Right? Now, I've got a 20 SEER. It runs 10 above ambient.
Okay.
So the higher the efficiency, the narrower that gap
lower.
is, right? So now I've come across some older 12 SEER that were probably more like 13, I would think. When I was installing 410A equipment back in 97, 98, 99, and to this day, on average, I see them running around 335, 340 head pressure. Well, that actually comes out to be about usually around 15 to 20 above ambient, but sometimes 15 above ambient. So what I look at is 20 is the average, right, for a 14 to 15, 16 SEER. But if you're running a little bit lower than that, and your subcooling's right, your superheat's right according to your TXP, then you're just running a little bit more efficient, and that's okay. You just don't want to see it more than that. You don't want to see it more than 20 degrees above ambient on these higher efficient units.
Well, let's think about that then for a minute. So we've already got a saturation temperature without putting our gauges on it. Could we measure subcooling based on the same principle?
Absolutely. So now we're getting into the magic that I love about this. So if we know we've got everything cleaned, everything's properly running right? Yep. Then yeah. So let's just go look at a newer unit, 14 SEER, 14 SEER 2. Again, doesn't matter what refrigerants in that system. If you know, in our 95 degree outdoor example, we add 20, we know that our saturation should be 150. Well, subcooling, let's say the unit's calling for an average of a 10 degree subcooling. It's the definition of subcooling is any degree below saturated temperature.
That's right.
And that way we know it's a liquid. So one reason for subcooling is to make sure it's a liquid. The second reason for subcooling is to make sure we got the right quantity of refrigerant in the system. All right. So now if our required subcooling is 10, then you go and measure the liquid line, and it should be 10 degrees cooler than the saturated temperature. So if we have a 105 degree liquid line, then that would be a 10 degree subcooling. And you didn't even put any gauges on it. So this is a good check on startup.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the condenser's clean as it'll ever be. The evaporator's clean as it'll ever be. You're going to verify airflow because that's not guaranteed till you check it. And as long as all that's right, you got the cleanest blower wheel you'll ever have. Boom, you should be able to really do a subcooling check without throwing any gauge on it, because the last thing I ever want to do is put gauges on the system. That's the last thing I want to do. But if you need to, if you have to, the next question is, what should my pressure be? Well, now we know. Take that saturation,
take that temperature.
So, because a lot of guys I know for their commissioning, they got all the back gear hooked up to it, right? They got the pressure pros, they got the temperature pros, they got it, and they got to do all that reporting. Well, no problem. Now you know. I was just talking to a group today, and I asked about their commissioning. I said, "What do you do when you commission it?" They said, "Well, we fill out that sheet that's in the back of the installation guide." I said, okay, you fill out the data, but what are you comparing it to? They had no standard to compare their numbers to.
Right.
And I said, when you go in and get your blood pressure checked, the assistant comes in and does the numbers, but the doctor comes and interprets them. But when you're the commissioning guy, guess what? You are the doctor. You have to have a standard to go by. Now you have a standard. Now you know what your subcoolant ought to be, because that's on the side of the unit. But now you know what your pressures ought to be too, if that's what you're looking for. But you can do all this without sticking any gauges on it and be confident that you've got a chart system.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was doing commercial refrigeration, we also took care of all of the HVAC for the buildings as well. So you think about some of your larger grocery stores, right? You never put gauges on a unit unless your subcooling was off, right? We'd walk around. What's the ambient temperature? What's the discharge temperature? What's the liquid line temperature? Move on to the next one, right? These are all package units. If they got brand new clean filters after we clean the condensers, these things should be running in that ballpark, right? So that was what we did with every unit. If it was off, then we could get our gauges out and go determine, all right, what's happening on this thing. But we can go further than the subcooling. We could use this same philosophy and move to the evaporator side of the unit.
That's exactly right. You can. So if you take that same principle and apply it to evaporator, the nice thing about evaporators is that the efficiency did not affect the evaporator saturated temperature change. So we're always looking at return air temperature minus 35. The evaporator coil should be running 35 degrees colder than whatever the return air temperature coming in is. With one exception, it should never be lower than 32 degrees.
32,
then
right.
it's freezing up, right?
Exactly.
And I don't ever like to get it that close, right? But we run it fairly close in the sense that if we got an example of 75-degree return air, you subtract 35, and you're going to have a 40-degree saturated evaporator coil.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you a good leeway for you're not going to be freezing up the coil.
Exactly.
And you'll be dehumidifying as well as. Now, the older units ran a little bit colder. So anybody out there that's working on some old R22 system, whatever, 10 SEER, yes, they would run more like a 40-degree colder evaporator coil. So they kind of inch that down closer to that 32-degree mark. But that was the only way they really could get a good dehumidification out of the air.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But now that we can control the fan speeds and all, the efficiency did bump up the required saturation, but with our airflow correct, then we'll be okay. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how we can check that out invasively. But now we'll take the return air. If it's 75, you minus 35, that's what your saturation ought to be. Now you can convert that to pressure no matter what the refrigerant is.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know what the pressure ought to be. Now you can know what suction what temperature be, because well, in this example, if it's 75 return air, we minus 35, we got a 40 saturation. And so TXVs on average will hold between a 5 and a 15-degree superheat. That's an average. And then this is why most people gravitate between 10 and 12 degrees superheat, because in the middle of that is about 10 or 12.
Yep. Exactly.
So, but an EEV is more precise and it's much more specific. A lot of them I've seen hold a 9, sometimes a 6.
Yep.
So you got to look at the manufacturer to find out what their EEV is calling for, but it's going to be pretty much dead on. Okay. And so find out what your superheat ought to be. If it's a TXV, you're looking for about let's just pick 10 as a good average. Okay. And that's easy. All right. If that's the case, then your saturation should be 40. Add 10. So your suction line leaving the evaporator should be
not
50.
at the outdoor unit though. That's what we have to be careful. Right. We're measuring actual superheat at the coil. So you don't want to be right next to the coil. I like to get at least 8 to 10 inches away from the connection, but you want to be close to the evaporator coil.
And there is an allowance, for superheat gain, but most of the time everybody's taking them right there at the condenser.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's typically within the allowed refrigerant line length, and it is properly insulated all the way down, then you shouldn't lose too much, and you should be
few degrees,
pretty
maybe.
darn close. All right, even if you're within 2 degrees, you're still
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
So you're all right. But if you ever are concerned, then measure the pressure, the line temperature at the evaporator, and then measure at the unit, and you can take a check. By the way, if you want to know if you have a restricted liquid line, just to give you a little heads up, another invasive check is to measure the liquid line temperature leaving the condenser, and then the liquid line temperature entering the evaporator. You should have no more than a 2-degree temperature change there. If you got more than 2-degree temperature drop, you've got an excessive restriction. And I've bought killed compressors due to that.
Absolutely.
Typically, where guys tie into from a 3/8 to a 7/16 behind the siding of the house, and then it went back up to a 3/8 when they got in the attic, and they were hoping that little 15-foot line wouldn't be a problem, but
it did.
I had a 7-degree temperature drop on that line. That was terrible.
Wow, that's crazy.
So one more invasive. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, let's do that. We got a few minutes left. Sure.
If you have good airflow, excuse me, if you have proper airflow, and you have clean coils, and you have clean coils, and you are confident all those are good, one last check is you can measure the dry bulb and wet bulb drop across the evaporator. Now we want to check this as close to the evaporator as possible. Okay, we don't want any other influences on it. We want to know what is that evaporator actually dealing with. Okay, and this is where a lot of guys miss. As a tech rep, a lot of times the unit they thought the charge was off, everything was off. Before we threw on gauges, we measure wet bulb and dry bulb across the evaporator. This is akin to the temperature riser across the furnace. Okay, and it told me almost everything, because if all this other stuff is in line, the wet bulb and dry bulb is literally the total amount of heat that system is removing. And if it's removing the right amount of total heat, then all the other stuff's in play. Okay. So this, and I got this straight from a carrier engineer, and you can plot this on a chart. But if you have, and it's a ratio between 16 to 18 degree dry bulb, along with a 10-degree wet bulb drop. If you got those two in line, so it's not just dry bulb, which everybody looks at. And of course, they think the more the better. That's not true. All right. If you got a 16 to 18 dry bulb with a 10-degree wet bulb, that ratio right there is dead on. It doesn't matter whether it's a 2-ton unit or a 20-ton or a 200-ton. If it is an air-cooled, air conditioning application, those two ratios will be there. And you can do the reverse if you check those first. Honestly, everything else
place to start.
Be right.
Exactly.
The other one you can check is the temperature rise method, the sensible heat method at the condenser. All right, you can look up, it's an axial fan.
Yep.
You can look up the CFMs of that fan in the data for the outdoor unit. You can measure the temperature coming in, temperature going out. Now, you're going to have motor heat and compressor heat. Understood. So you're going to be rejecting a little bit more heat than it's rated at. But you could actually use the same form you do for strip heat and use that across the condenser and get a pretty good idea. If it's like a 3-ton unit, it should be rejecting at least 36,000. And if you add compressor and motor in there, then you should be rejecting a little bit more than 36,000.
That's right.
But if it's reduced, producing less than that, then you got a problem. That's another quick check too.
Love it. All innovasively using temperatures alone. Joey, where can we learn more about you and your training? Well,
if you go to JoJo the HVAC Man, and it is JOE, the HVAC Man. If you do the other one, you're going to get some turkey, and I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But JOE, the HVAC Man. Go to my YouTube channel. I've got some training there. You can go to my TikTok channel. I've got a lot more training there. That seems to be a biggie these days. But also, I love doing remote training. I travel all over the country doing training on sites at conferences, and I do a lot of webinars as well. I'd love to talk to anybody that would love training. I love training, and I love helping other people. And just reach me through there. You can also hit me up on JoJo the HVAC Man at gmail.com.
Awesome. I appreciate you joining us today. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Clifton.